Ah, the infamous Young Turks. The fine sultans of semi-truth, the prognosticators of propaganda of the leftist persuasion themselves. For those of you who are tuning in who have maybe less of a history with this YouTube channel than I do, the Young Turks and I have a little bit of a history, going back about maybe 2 years or so, back to around the time that the Republican primary was in full swing and the Ron Paul movement was picking up steam in the aftermath of the famed November 5th, 2007 money bomb. Being good liberal gatekeepers as they were, although I stress I use liberal in the modern corrupted definition, not in the true definition of classical liberalism, they came forth and decided to echo that infamous smear story that everybody was repeating in the mainstream media. So evidently, apparently, even though nobody really listens to the Young Turks or anything else on Air America, they were behaving in a very mainstream media fashion, which kind of runs roughshod through that idea that they were ever some sort of an independent source of information. I use the term source of information very loosely because you don't really get much useful information out of them. I mean, Jesus, this channel actually has a story on atheists going around and unbaptizing themselves. Like, who the fuck cares about that? I'm sorry. I mean, even if I was an atheist, so what? I mean, some sort of symbolic gesture to undo the religious choices that your parents made for you when you were a kid is, I don't know, it's not something that I really consider worthy of media attention. But essentially, this was a reenactment of a Baptist baptism in reverse. So it wasn't a child baptism. It was a young age. It wasn't an infant baptism. I'm sorry. It was a young age baptism where they immersed the entire body in water, something which is actually heretical if you actually read certain passages in the Bible about how Jesus would sprinkle the nations, and sprinkle the baptized and all the whatnot. I can't remember the exact Bible verses, but I'll probably be able to dig them up on a later video. But I'm definitely digressing here. Anyway, to make a long story short, when this whole Ron Paul is a racist crap was going on and the Young Turks got on board with it, I made a nice little video basically tearing them a new one. And within a couple days of posting it on their channel, they took the video off. Apparently, I hit them a little harder than they were used to being hit here on YouTube, mostly because nobody really watched their videos at the time. I think they had well under 5,000 subscribers, and they've been on YouTube for 2 years. They've caught on in recent years because they've been, filleting Obama, and as a result, a lot of his mind-numbed androids have come on to the Young Turks heroin distribution to get their fix. So for any of you who are curious about that little piece of history, me ripping these guys a new one and then not being able to take it, I left the link in the sidebar for the video that I made towards them, and also the video I was responding to, since you cannot get to the video I was responding to through my video because they removed it. But moving away from that now and moving on to something I found a little bit more interesting. The truth is that even though my good buddy here, How the World Works, is making a valiant effort in trying to disseminate the foolishness that these guys pass off as media info, there's really no way to refute bullshit. It's basically self-refuting, but I applaud How the World Works for taking some time out of his busy schedule to try and accomplish this. I think it's a futile venture, but I could be wrong on that one. I instead wanted to focus on something a little bit more curious and a bit ironic, or perhaps actually not that ironic. I left the link for this in the sidebar also. This is actually pretty old. Now, do any of you wonder where the name the Young Turks originated from? It's a little bit of a doozy that I'm going to tell you about right now. The date was January 23rd, and the year was 1908. A group of young officers in the Ottoman army formed a political group called the Committee for Unity and Progress, ergo they were the progressives. Like so many young men before them, they were angry at the way things were and felt confident they could do a better job of things. The guy responsible for the status quo was Sultan Abdul Hamid, head of the Ottoman Empire. As Sultan, he controlled Ottoman worldly affairs, and as Caliph, he directed their spiritual affairs. Both of these were in absolute shambles, and the angry young men brought all the political pressure they could to bear upon the Sultan. The phrase political pressure is used euphemistically, until at last they compelled him to accept a constitution. The constitution, it was hoped, would modernize the empire and return Ottomans to their rightful place, presumably in front of the recliners. It guaranteed religious liberty, among other things, which brought on the immediate disapproval of Islamites. Unlike their modern counterparts, these Islamites could be quite vicious when they felt snubbed, and they attempted a coup against the Sultan. It failed, but the Sultan took note of the simmering discontent and attempted to slow down the secularization being urged by the CUP, abbreviated the Committee for Unity and Progress, which was by now half full. No pun intended, at least not by me. Unfortunately, the new constitution specified that interference with the constitution was unconstitutional, and so the Sultan was deposed and replaced. The CUP had begun as a pan-national movement designed to broaden support for the crumbling Ottoman Empire by appealing to the various nationalities of its constituents. But now they began to have second thoughts. It was very complicated being pan-national. It would be easier just to be Turks. By 1913, other political groups were contending for power with the CUP, so they did the logical thing. 90 years ago, this very day that this was written, they seized power. The Ottoman Empire was thenceforward ruled by the so-called Young Turks. 3 young men in their mid-30s by the names of Enver Pasha, Mehmed Talat, and Ahmed Djemal. I think that's how you pronounce it. Pasha became the Ministry of War. Talat was put in charge of internal affairs, and Djemal was given the Navy. Having studied extensively in Europe, the 3 men judged it prudent to side with the Central European powers in the First World War. With an eye toward the second, they took the added step of ratcheting up their Turkish pride and decimating half the Armenian population, an act of genocide with no equal in the history of the world before the Holocaust. This resulted in military defeat and bad karma, and the Young Turks fell from power at the war's end in 1918. Middle-aged Turks took over from there, and the rest was smooth sailing. The end, or unquote. There's a certain biblical passage, it's Hosea 13:11, that I think fits this situation quite nicely. I gave thee a king in my anger and took him away in my wrath. Now I want you to chew on this for a second, my secular progressives. A movement modeled after the same concept as you guys turned into essentially what destroyed half of the Armenian population. Stick that in your pipe and smoke it. With prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you, good evening.